Communication through the Orthodox Christian Network. I'm Michael Howells. This is also a ministry of the Greek Orthodox Church of St. George in Bethesda, Maryland. And as always, I'll tell people that are joining online, feel free to put your comments and questions in the chat box. And if I see them, I'll address them. Otherwise, I look throughout the week and see if there's anything I missed. And what I noticed the tendency is more people tend to look throughout the week than necessarily join live. So we're going to continue today. The topic today is marriage monasticism. And if we get to it, we're going to talk about the icon of the bridegroom. I was just saying before class began, in our theme this year has been icons, Christ and life. And we've been looking at things from an iconographic perspective. And we started this marriage series, I don't know, back maybe in October. And I thought it would go 2 to 3 weeks, but here we are in January and we're still continuing. So it's all good. So just to recap briefly, last week towards the end, we got into the discussion of the similarities and differences between marriage and monasticism, and we're going to continue on that thread today and hopefully have a meaningful and open discussion. So I just wanted to start by throwing some thoughts out there for discussion or facilitation. The first one is we're going to talk about what's similar between them, or if you agree, but I'll throw out what I think similar about them. So I guess true or false in the Orthodox ethos, if you will, are marriage and monasticism considered two equal blessed ways of life? Or is one higher than the other? Little couple softballs out there for everybody. So equal. So why? Well, I mean, why do you think they're equal? How would you characterize them? Sacramental. What else? Anything?
Sacrificial.
Certainly sacrificial.
Amen.
Amen.
Right, both.
Both.
Commitment.
Yeah. Commitment. Yeah. Whenever you talk about marriage, you always get a lot of humor. I guess that's how we all cope. They choose that sacramental path of life. Hey, John. Do you think? So yeah. So there are. I mean, there. Especially if I think several of you have been to monasteries multiple times. And my guess is if you have, you've had conversations with the priests, the monks, the nuns.
Mm-hmm.
Has your experience been when you talk to them that they see marriage or see the spiritual journey of laity as equally challenging and difficult as monastery or harder? Anybody have that experience?
Well, I guess I haven't had any profound conversations with any of the people. I'm waiting for somebody to share on when you talk.
I have, and their conversation when I have conversations with them, it's always keep up the good fight.
The struggle.
The struggle. So I speak to them in Greek. So anyway, you can,
Hey, Susan.
But they say, stay strong. This life is temporary. Stay strong. Stay faithful. They're all about encouraging and prayerfully encouraging. I will pray for you. Please pray for me.
I think as laity, I think sometimes we could almost romanticize the role of the monk. Oh, it must be easy. I don't have to be out there. But they have their struggles, just different struggles.
Yes.
And profound struggles too, right? More spiritually to live a relatively ascetic life. That's not an easy path either. I remember one of my brother-in-laws actually met Mother Teresa at one time and heard her speak, and she said to people, don't drop everything you're doing and go to the monastery. You have a life, you have your families, and those are holy callings also. And they're just different.
Yeah, you hit on something interesting. I had a plan for later, but we're going to go over the map today. If it's okay with everybody. Yeah, you hit on this notion of asceticism, right? And romanticizing. George, you said romanticizing the monastic life.
Yeah.
Say that again, as if it was harder or easier.
I think for lay people, sometimes, we go through all the stuff that's involved in the world, and it's easy to say, oh, you know, if I was a monk or, you know, whatever, you know, it's a simpler life.
Oh, right, right, right.
Easier, you know.
Mhm.
I can just sit there and, you know, get into the groove with God and all that. But, you know, it's not just that easy. It's a struggle. When you talk to people who've been there, or if you read things, you know, that's a struggle, and maybe in some ways more intense, right? You know, because you're so focused on your spirituality and your relationship with God. You know, we get, you know, I want to say distracted, but, you know, we have the everyday concerns, you know, our children, our jobs, or
Mhm.
whatever. And there, you know, theirs is very profound, but it's not easier. We just tend to, again, I'll use the word romanticize it. Oh, give this up. Oh, to be a monk, it'll be easy. No.
Well, yeah, I think when you're sitting there, you have a fight with your spouse, or you got a big bill to pay, and all of a sudden you're thinking, man, I just want to go to a cell and relax. You know,
No.
yeah, it's not quite that way, right? We all feel like, yeah, that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Maria, you had
Well, I
something?
was just going to say, I think on this end of the spectrum, it looks like that it's harder for them, that it's hard for them.
Mhm.
But I think for them, after they get used to being in that
Mhm.
Mhm.
situation, I think it's very relaxed and very easy for them.
Hmm.
So
my
I just
monk
think-
friends calls it a joyful struggle.
There you go.
That's what he says.
Joyful
I'll
struggle.
say that, those, it appears to be from the outside, those who are in a monastic life are supported by people around
Mhm.
them
Yeah.
about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
And therefore, it looks like that's an easier way to
Yeah.
stay on the path. Well, we've got the plumber to deal with, and
Yeah.
the orthodontist, and the headmaster of the school, and your little darling did this, and your other darling did something else. So those are mighty distracting.
Yeah, so go ahead, Mary.
They maintain a routine also,
Yes.
and it's a
Yeah.
routine of prayer. The only unexpected that really comes about from my friend who's a monk, he says, is the struggles of individuals that come in with things in their lives, and they're praying and interceding for them. Mind you, they're praying on the every 3 hours, so it's 3, 6, and 6 a.m. or 3 a.m.
Mhm.
and so forth. So every 3 hours they're up for prayer. And I said, well, do you put an alarm on? Because I would need an alarm. And they said, no, they just automatically are up
because
and all the way up, not just laying in bed to pray. They're up and praying. So
Yeah, although I remember when I was at a monastery, I remember, I can't remember if it was there I had the conversation or subsequent to that when I spoke to the abbot, but he has to spend a lot of time fundraising and doing all the things administratively to keep the lights on,
yeah.
right? So there's not always an escape from the worldly concerns
I think
because
about that with Father Dimitri, with all these
Mhm.
fabulous men here. It's much more difficult to administer the works, raise money, see the lights come on, as you say, and then, Father, hear my confession, and tears, and that must just be enormously stressful.
yeah, because well, yeah, I would imagine it is, but I think the way we can relate to that, if we've chosen, and I assume all of you have, because we're all in this room together, striving to live the sacramental life in our daily life, we have the same concerns, right? Because we probably all have a prayer routine
Mhm.
that makes sense to us within the context of our life, right? And I'm sure that prayer routine and that peace gets interrupted with different things, and then it's sometimes hard to get back to that place, right? We all have. I personally have a morning prayer routine. I'm sure many of you do too. But if something happens to happen that morning, or something of the day before lingers, it's not always easy to get into that place that you want to be in, because we equate. I think a lot of the romanticizing has to do with we equate the joyful struggle to a place of peace. And that's not the sacramental life at all. I mean, hopefully you can get there, but a lot of times we pray despite the lack of peace. We do these things despite the place we're in, because it's just like eating your vegetables, whether you feel like it or not, it's still good for you, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't change the nature of what the vegetable is, our mood about it. So I think the challenges remain the same. And I think in a monastery, at least, I know like this one person I was talking to, I was able, he receives text. I'm able to text him if I want him to pray for something, or whatever. And I'm sure he's getting that from lots of people while they're still trying to follow the rule of prayer, while they're still teaching the seminarians, and while they're still trying to raise money to keep the monastery going. So I think, a lot of these things. And I think that, in our married lives, or in our family lives, or whatever path we're on in life or chosen, I think the problems remain much more similar maybe than we think they are. That's been my experience, at least. But I want to get back to asceticism, because I think that was interesting you raised that point. So what is asceticism? I'm not being rhetorical. Like, how do you understand it? How would you explain if someone said, I don't know anything about church or nothing. What's asceticism?
Discipline.
Discipline, yeah, that's fair. Certainly discipline. Any other?
Simplicity.
Simplicity?
Sorry.
No, not at all. It's kind of cheating, because I'm going back to the ancient Greek. So I was looking at presbytera.
Oh, yeah.
Spiritual exercises, right? Ascesis are exercises. They're the things that we do to attain a higher spiritual level or experience of theosis. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it comes from the word, I have in my notes, at least if I'm right. You guys, the Greeks are better than I am. The real Greeks, not me. Fake Greek, doesn't know the language. I think it doesn't derive from a word I trained, like training.
Well, I don't know what the verb is, probably something like askino or whatever, but ascesis is the noun for exercises.
Yeah. I think the verb I have here.
Ascesi.
Ascesi.
Ascesis. Yeah. Yes. It's all
it says the
related.
verb meaning I train. But either way, because Paul talks about it in Timothy, right? The athlete. He uses the athlete and the athletic analogy of training. But it's even those are all good. But there's even something more at its root that it is, that I'm at least I'm getting at for the purpose.
Clergy say it's an accelerated death. I don't know. It's taking it pretty extreme, but I've heard clergy say it's sort of accepting an accelerated death. I don't know if that's to be taking it to extreme.
I have to think that through.
You mean because we're so focused on
eternity?
Yeah.
I always had thought a connotation of kind of a denial of kind of like earthly pleasures or luxury. I always think of an ascetic as somebody that, isn't at the banquet table and doesn't have fancy clothes. It's the opposite of that, very plain and very simple life.
But aren't these all basically subcategories to attain the kind of training or whatnot? I mean, like humility, simplicity, all of these things are part of that whole process of the kinds of exercises and training we go through to change the way that we live and ideally think and speak in order to attain that theosis, or to approach it.
Yeah, it's all good. What I have written down here that I wanted to point out today, that is, in essence, asceticism is voluntarily giving up something good, right? It's not, and I just heard that. It's funny because I love when this happens. You three of us have talked about this in the Holy Spirit, but whenever I'm putting something together, inevitably I read something or listen to something. Oh yeah, that's exactly what I want to say, but that's better. Let me. So I was listening to a podcast, and that's what the priest reminded us of, that in the East, it's in the Orthodoxy, it's about giving up something good, not resisting evil, because that's what we're supposed to do anyway. There's nothing aesthetic about resisting evil and sin. That's what we're supposed to do. And so contextually, where I'm going to is, where did asceticism begin? Where could we make a case that asceticism began?
Where it began.
Yeah.
I mean, historically.
Yeah. Or spirit,
Saint Anthony?
Well, even before that, yeah. St. Anthony, right. I mean, the desert monastics, the founder, St. Anthony the Great.
Mary of Egypt. I mean,
Jesus was in the desert. Jesus.
Find me a desert somewhere.
Exodus.
Okay, we're getting there. No, what I'm getting at is Genesis. Genesis, when the first ascetic command, do not eat from the tree, fasting. I give you everything, but you must fast from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it wasn't because that tree was bad. It was, as St. Gregory the theologian says, they weren't ready for it yet, all in good time. So, and what I'm saying, Adam and Eve, so we find asceticism in its roots within marriage, right in the beginning, because that's the thread I'm connecting. So how does that then apply? And again, we've talked in this room, we've talked about marriage in the typical context, but also as even, more than just husband and wife, also the marriage meaning the union of all of us to God, right? Whether we're married or not, we all have, because Christ is the bridegroom. So, marriage is embedded in our understanding of our relationship to God, whether we're married or not, so to speak, by our definition. So we have here, this whole aesthetic notion embedded in our relationship to God, of giving up something good for what? Not just because God just wants to test us. What's the whole purpose of giving up something good?
To draw nearer to God.
To get something better. To draw nearer to God, right? But I wouldn't say just in the West, human nature in general, I would say that the whole notion of self-denial does not come natural to us, right? Unless who said it earlier? Unless the struggle, I think at least, unless the struggle begins as a struggle and then becomes a joyful struggle. Maybe just the beginning is just a struggle, right? But as we taste the joyful struggle, then we start to get a clue of, oh, giving up doesn't mean really giving up. You're getting, right? That makes sense? I mean, do you agree? I mean, does your experience, the words I'm saying, does your experience match that or no? Because if it doesn't, then my words are just words, right? It's just.
I think with orthodoxy, isn't it? We're wanting to get into the life of Christ, not just saying, I want Christ in my life.
Right.
So we're focusing, through this, getting into the life of Christ, coming closer to Christ.
But a lot of our,
Christ-like.
yeah, exactly. But a lot of our language, I think,
Yes,
like,
that betrays us.
yeah,
And it makes it very difficult to discuss. So when I speak with a woman I'm working with, a committee thing, and she said, I'm indulging myself. I'm doing the crossword puzzle. And I'm not going to take a shower. I'm just going to sit here and have coffee and another coffee, and do instead of writing the thing that we're doing. And she said, and I know it's all wrong, but I'm just going to do that. And it sounded like right out of Martin Luther to me. so I, there's a
Pretty good.
language. We don't give up something at Lent.
right. Well, think about how most of the conversation goes during Lent. Maybe not necessarily within Orthodox circles. Maybe I've heard Orthodox say, I'm giving up candy for Lent, or I'm giving up.
That's
yeah.
what I'm saying about language.
Yeah.
It's not a giving up, it's an embracing.
Right.
To my way of thinking. My Roman Catholic husband, my wife gives up everything. Well, as I think you've all heard me say before, sort of like week 3.5, he says, we got to have a hamburger because the cat's food's starting to look pretty good.
Yeah.
Right.
I think we've all been there. About the last week of Lent, I'm seeing steak wherever I go. But it is true. That's a lot of the phraseology is the dreading of what I got to give up. Right? It's not framed in our thought or in our mind a lot in our language about what we're gaining. We don't even speak about it like that a lot. And it becomes, I would say, I'll probably get in trouble for this, but I think too sometimes it can play into what I'll call an Orthodox pathology or zealotry, where we're starting to get so focused on the harshness of asceticism that we're forgetting the whole purpose, which all of it is just to draw us near to Christ, right? To increase the love in our heart for God and others. It's not really about checking ingredients or being so rigorous in your ascetic life that you're feeling good about the rigor, right? It's all about the goal, right? So I think, and the reason I say too, I wrote that in my notes about, and again, probably make people mad at me, but I think that it can play into sometimes how we see civilian or laity life versus monastic life, right? Like, so is a monastery or a church holier necessarily than your home?
Well, church is, it's the sanctuary.
Mhm.
The host is there.
Right.
Christ is in our homes, but
Mhm.
the church is set apart.
Right. But you just said it, I think, correctly based on my understanding. But some would think that you go to a place to find God versus like Christ is everywhere present and fills all things. So by definition, Christ is in the home, Christ is in the church, Christ is in the monastery. You go to these places for I don't know if I say heightened experience, but for a purpose that helps you to continue your relationship with Christ, but not that Christ isn't here, but he's there, right? And I think sometimes ascetics, monasteries, one of the things I've experienced, and not necessarily personally, I've seen it with people, is there's almost like a perception if I go to this place, that's where God is. It's not, and make sure I'm phrasing this right. It's an orientation of your heart that actually diminishes your experience of what that place is for. Because if you go to a monastery, if you're living the ascetic, the sacramental life, and you go to the monastery because you already know Christ is with you, but you still seeking Christ deeper, whatever. That's different as if I got to get away from my life. I got to go to a place where God is. Then that's really wrong. You fundamentally misunderstand. So, make sense?
But if I can add something to Elizabeth's point, I know if I go to a monastery, I will be girded or reinforced by all of these monks in my effort to attain or to approach theosy. So I know if I go to church on Sunday morning, I will be doing something that brings me closer to God than watching Sunday news shows. But by the same token, I think it's our goal, right? If like we said in previous weeks, if holy matrimony, right, is a sacrament, we should be doing everything we can to make our home as similar to a church experience. It shouldn't be a diminished place.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like light going through a prism. It's still light. I don't know. Maybe that's not a bad analogy. But the point is, you're right. It's God is everywhere present and fills all things, and all of aspects of life are ways for us to continually, as Father Tim said, repent by the definition of focusing on God. It's just going to be different. And just as an example, part of what leads us astray is a mindset that God is in a place or contained only there. Like we see it in I don't know why I'm thinking of this, but I'm thinking of the first martyr Stephen. That's what he was railing against the Pharisee. He goes, "You stiff-necked people. You think God is in this temple alone, or whatever." It's not. It's that kind of mindset. But I think it can be easy to fall into sometimes because we have so many. With the monastic influence on our faith, which is all good stuff. It's just that sometimes we can mess it up. Is what I'm saying. Okay.
But I think similarly, outside of sort of physical structures, right? Even when we talk about awe, like in awe of nature, right? And you get a sense of God's creation. And then when I'm feeling those very, very rare moments where I'm feeling especially enlightened, and I'll just be out in a massive, crazy crowd of people, and they're freaks. And yet somehow in the bottom of my heart, I have to say that these are all God's creatures, right?
these imperfect beings, the imperfect beings, the encounter with the imperfect beings. You had to be here last week for that.
To your point, like God is in all places and feeling all things. Like even the things that we say are far removed from God, in one way, maybe, but in other ways, they are epitomes of God's creation. They are God's creation. So beyond just the physical structures, just in our fellow human beings of whatever category we may find them.
I remember I had a drink at lunch one time in the hot sun in Texas, and I walked back to the hotel, and I walked into a minimum security facility, and I saw all these roughnecks around me. I was like, "What's going on here?" Just reminded me, I did not feel God in that moment. I felt fear. Right?
Well, but naturally you don't. But
no.
Then when you actually stop and
think about it,
what we're talking about here, that really is what it all comes down to, right?
And no, it really does. And that's really, part of the training, the ascesis or whatever how you pronounce it. In a marriage context or in a relationship context, that's where that comes into play a lot, because let's face it, in our friendships, our marriages, we're not always feeling warm and fuzzy, and sometimes we're feeling the equivalent of we're around freaks, right? But it's all for that salvific molding of us, right? Go ahead, Andrea.
Well, when I think about God being everywhere, I always think about us being on our personal journeys too. And some people may be able to stand at their icons at home and feel like God is present there. And other people, that faith is pretty strong. And for many of us, we do need to come to church and we need to take away all those distractions.
Mhm.
But we can't forget that God is in the home, but there may be some people that aren't there yet in their journey,
Right.
that they need to go to church and develop that sense that God is with them. But what is the church? It's our community. It's when we gather together, right? And that's what really lifts us up, so that when we do go home, we can carry that feeling of having God at home.
Yeah, well, and we all need the church regardless, even if we're like, for lack of better term, spiritually evolved, where we're 24/7 in that blissful place, right? Because the church, it's everything centers on the Eucharist, right? Our whole faith is communing. So yeah, there's hardship cases, there's geographical problems, there's certainly circumstances where people can't get to places. We get all that. And of course, God's grace goes beyond the rules he sets for us, right? He's not bound by anything. But for most of us, right, so the point we're making is really do it all, right? We can't lose sight that all places, remember we talked, was it this year or last year? There's really no such thing as sacred and secular. All space is sacred space, but some is more than others, by the sense of how God, because that's what God gave to us, right? That Christ gave us the church for the purpose of sharing himself. So we're supposed to come to church regardless, not because it's a rule, because that's the means for the highest level of our union with him is through the Eucharist, with the common cup with him and each other. And of course, we're supposed to, our whole life outside of the church walls is derivative of this Eucharistic understanding, communion with him and others. And it's just, whether it's laity or monastic, I think the challenges of that just are different in terms of maintaining. I don't know if I'd say focus, because it's not always based on a emotional feeling or a mental assent. It's just the remembrance to do all those things, really, because when the monks are living by a rule of prayer, they don't have to remember, right? You're living by the rule of prayer. It just simply is 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock. You're doing the rule of prayer. But in our lives, it doesn't always afford a rigorous rule of prayer like that, nor should it necessarily. I mean, I have some quotes here and stuff. I'm not necessarily read them, but it's all how we, as we work out our own salvation with fear and trembling, how we do that in our own circumstances. But it's important to continually do that, because that's how we maintain our faithfulness, right? Because remember, faith it's more about what we do than necessarily what we think and feel. I mean, that hopefully it all goes together. That's where our peace comes from. But it's hard to do that. So I think those are some of the challenges. Go ahead, Mary.
So the direct translation of ascesis is exercises.
Mhm.
So those exercises
Yeah.
and the training and discipline. We used to say to the high schoolers, we used to say wax on and wax off.
Oh, yeah.
So your training, your physical training, but your spiritual training. So, but it involves also the spiritual training with the actual ascesis. So the monks, not only when they're praying, we used to joke, and it's a terrible joke, but we would say monk push-ups, where they're literally down and stretch and back. And so we called them and even the monks would laugh at us when we would call them monk push-ups. But it's the ascesis, or the exercises of doing all of this, and also their discipline in 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock and all the different things.
And can I add to that?
Yeah,
Doesn't
please.
that discipline help make this a habit or a series of habits?
Correct.
Where after a while, I missed the first 10 minutes of the discussion, so I apologize, but it sounded like when I came in, we're all feeling sorry for the monks, but like you were saying, it's a joyful struggle. But they've made all these exercises their habits. This is
Right.
their life.
Right.
That's it.
Their
I mean,
life.
they've already weeded out the ones who can't do it.
Exactly.
and there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
No, there's a lot of
Because
them.
not everyone has that vocation.
Of course.
Yeah, that's right.
They
Yeah.
may want to.
Right.
And then they go there and they fail. And they say to them, you're not ready for this, but only a select few can actually do this for the rest of their lives.
Right. And they're also filling their time. So when we were in the bookstore, I noticed that they were constantly whispering. And I finally went up and I said, may I ask what you're saying? He said, the Jesus prayer. So it's a continual, even in their, transactions of in the bookstore or whatever they're doing in the garden or whatever. And some of them, you'll actually hear them louder when they're in the garden, working and doing whatever work they're assigned or task. In the kitchen, they were singing, you could hear them singing hymns of the church if they weren't saying the Jesus prayer. So it was always filled with that joyfulness. And it was almost, it made you happy. I mean, you were like, wow,
Can I add one more thing?
Please.
So and Mike and I, we were talking to Tassos before. So I had the joyful experience of going to Simonos Petras monastery 2 summers ago. And I met there Father Iakovos. And if you've never seen that 60 Minutes segment, that famous one from about 10, 12 years ago, if you haven't, it's on YouTube. Watch it. It's 2 segments. The main one was 15 minutes, and there was a second segment that's 30 minutes. But Father Iakovos was from Boston. He's a monk there at Simonos Petras, and he was being interviewed by Bob Simon. I won't get into the larger details, but to your point here, at some point in the interview, he said to Bob Simon that we're praying constantly, ceaselessly. And so Bob Simon says, yes, but I'm interviewing now. You're answering my question. And he says, but you don't think that I'm praying for you right now while I'm answering your questions? And he just stared at Bob Simon, who didn't know how to respond, because we don't know how to respond to somebody who's saying, I'm praying for you while we're speaking together, because we don't do that. And that's the gift that they have. But I strongly recommend, it's on YouTube. It's a fantastic 30 minutes of your time.
But it also gets back to Maritza saying about language too, because we have connotations of what words mean, right? Like prayer usually means muttering something, saying something, but prayer manifests. I know you guys know that it manifests in different ways. You can become living prayer even while you're doing something else. You can bring prayer to everything. You can live prayerfully. It's more of an awareness, right? I mean, Mary, you've talked to me about this, how, I don't know if you do it all the time, but when you remember to pray when you're making food.
I do.
And
everybody says it tastes better. What did you do? I made the same ingredient. And I actually learned that from John's uncle in Cyprus. As a husband and wife, they would cook and they would sing church hymns. And I thought that was so wonderful. And I said, and their food always tasted fantastic anyway. But I thought that, so I thought maybe that's an added recipe I'll add.
When your family's eating, they'll be like, Mom, you didn't pray for this, did you?
Yeah, exactly.
There's not knowing the difference.
We can think of the power of good and the power of bad words, bad things said to one another, and how eviscerating it is to hear those things. So the language it's just hugely important.
Absolutely.
Huge. And it's really hard to separate it, really. I don't know that it's possible.
No, it's hard. I mean, it's what we're given, the language, but there's etymology of words, there's context of words, there's culture. It's how they're being used. I mean, there's all kinds of things. But prayer, a lot of the things we talk about, I think this I'm giving you my opinion. I find, I don't want to pick on the West, but I'm going to. I find a lot of things in Western culture is always so reductionist that over time it loses a broader meaning, a broader depth of meaning. So that's why I think prayer has come to mean what people, what we think of. I'm saying a prayer, and faith means what I believe, versus faith is really, it's really the better English translation in the Bible is faithfulness. It's all about what you're doing, right? How you live your life. And same with prayer. Prayer has many different levels, just like this word marriage has many different levels, right? So that's all I think sometimes. And I mean, I'm guilty as is anybody else. I'm not, saying that. But words mean something, and they can mean the different things to different people, and we sometimes need to go a little bit deeper. I'm sure. I mean, I don't know Bob Simon, any of his background. I don't know if he's a Christian or whatever.
Jewish.
Okay.
He's Jewish, and he spent 12 days there.
Yeah.
He and his producer and photographer.
So he probably brought an understanding of prayer to the conversation that didn't necessarily make sense in that exchange at first, maybe.
Well, it didn't make sense because we all know prayer to be like, I take this time and I say this prayer, and usually I recite it out loud, and I do it in a specific place and whatnot. And there were these two gentlemen sitting on these stone steps, and Father Iakovos is just staring at him, saying, "Of course I'm praying for you as we speak."
I saw
Yeah.
that, by the way.
Yeah, I did too.
I did.
I
Was that
remember it
60
now.
minutes?
Yeah.
I remember it.
But I need to add too, because of what I said before about freaks, that I also have to make sure that I don't say things to people or do things to people so that I push them away from God. And they say, "What's with that freak?" Me
Yeah.
doing things that are unholy or
No doubt,
unchristian or whatnot.
no doubt you have. No doubt I have.
I'm
we all
certain I
have.
Yeah.
That's why Matthew 12, 36, 37 is so
Words.
powerful.
Yeah.
And I've studied that inside and out, because I tried to get out of it being literal, but it's not. It is literal. I'm saying I want it not to be literal, because then I'm off the hook. Right? But it is literal. And the older I've gotten to realize,
So wiser you've gotten.
well, it's just, I realize no matter what I do, I fail. Right. So, no matter what knowledge I think I have, no matter how many books I read, no matter how many podcasts I do, I just fail. And then so it just gets back. Matthew 12, 36, there's every word that I speak, you speak, will be held into account. Every word. So, and we use words carelessly sometimes. So that's where it's just, Lord, have mercy. Thank God for his grace.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I think. And I think that's what's great about getting older, all of us. I mean, none of us are teenagers in this room, is that, we live long enough, hopefully, to understand the beauty of orthodoxy and not get caught up in the orthodoxy itself, but understand how beautiful it is in terms of how it becomes that means to draw closer to Christ and each other. Because I think early on, it's so exciting, it's so cool. Something you get caught up in the coolness of it. Oh, I can fast, I can pray, I can do all these things. And you kind of maybe lose sight of what it's really about, right? Drawing us closer to Christ.
It's a tool.
The tool. But sometimes, people think of it as a requirement rather than a means, right? It's easy to fall into. And I think, even monasticism, they're brought, because monasticism, whoever said it earlier, I mean, it came later. Monasticism evolved later, right? Right in the beginning, there's marriage. Right in the beginning, there's aesthetics. There's all these roots. The Sabbath is like the first commandment. I mean, there's all these things right in the beginning, and the faith evolved and practices evolved, and so getting back to what you said about not everybody's cut out for the monastery. The monastery is a special calling. It's a special vocation. It's not meant for everybody, nor should it be, because God's first command was go forth and multiply, right? But this is something I'm stopping because I'm ready to go off on a million tangents, right? But the way things evolved, it wasn't necessarily the original intent. It's just that every time we messed up something, God blesses it anyway and makes it into something. Remember Revelation, behold, I make all things new, right? So, no evil we do will not result in the goodness of God's will, even though there might be a temporary thing we don't understand going on. So I think, and I'm not making a case in any way that monasticism is bad whatsoever. It's a good thing, but it's not for everybody, right? And so much of our understanding of faith comes from the Desert Fathers, the Holy Fathers, monastics. So as laity, we just have to be very skilled and spiritually aware how to apply that in our lives. That's all I'm saying. And some people, some of us are better at it than others, right?
So God is never changing.
No.
We're always changing. We're under construction.
Right.
So if we look at that, I'm under construction. I make a mistake. Like when you were saying all that, yeah, I get that. But you're also recognizing the fact you're still under construction. And so in that process, you're still saying, I made a mistake. Lord, forgive me. And he does. And you change not only by just saying, Lord, forgive me, you change your way. And so you're still, correcting that path. And
I think the point I'm making too is like, yeah, I'm under construction, but I thought I was more up to code. But but that's all. The older I get, I realize. Well, I didn't even think of it as pride. I just realized as I became exposed to the part where I'm not up to code, I'm like, oh, I'm not up to code. That's all. And then
It's the words.
there you go.
You have the feelings of faith, but the words, historically just the Latin learning and the attempt to speak it rather than be it is what we trip on.
Most of our division comes from misunderstanding of words.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes
It's
yes,
true.
other times perfectly clear.
Yeah.
You know evil when you see it.
Right.
We have to kill all these people.
Mhm.
They're in the way.
Yeah, it's evil.
Mhm.
But I'm saying a lot of
Yeah.
misunderstandings are sometimes because of language barriers or the experience culturally of one word versus how this culture experiences that word.
And
every-
translations.
yeah, translations. And because everything's an interpretation. I mean, even the Gospels are interpretations because they spoke in Aramaic, but they wrote it in Greek. So
Mhm.
they're translating, it's
Right.
not like there was some Greek speaking too, obviously, but it wasn't all just writing down what they heard. It was writing it in this
oral. Yeah,
language
it's
because
oral.
so everything is let's talk about vocation a little bit though, because obviously a priest or a monk, that's a vocation, a special vocation perhaps, but what about being married or being single or whatever? Are there vocations?
Yeah, calling.
Yeah, and most of us are called to one of those, not not the monastic, I think.
What do you mean, not the monastic? They're called also.
They're called also, but I'm saying very many feel the pull to that only to get there and realize that's not their calling, because there's the you probably had conversations along this line, maybe. I mean, visit a monastery, if you ever talk to them about it, there's a long process
Yeah.
to discern
yeah.
the calling.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
And it's because it's for that person, because a lot of people, maybe it's a grief or tragic situation or something leads them to that, but they want to really make sure that's your true calling. And I'm saying very few. Christ even said, he didn't say about the monastics, but he's talking about the celibates. He goes, those who can should, but most will not, right? Go forth and multiply, that's purpose in life, and the purpose in marriage, among many things. Not marriage has lots of purposes, but one of which, of course, is the potential to multiply. John Chrysostom even said, not all marriages are blessed and their purpose is childbearing, right? Because sometimes some people that can't have children or whatever sometimes feel like lesser citizens because of some of the dynamics of language, and that's not the case. A marriage that doesn't beget children is no less holy than a marriage that can.
Absolutely.
It's just like a marriage isn't more holy than a single existence, right? It's not. It's all the person's the person's living of their vocation in a Christ-like manner, which is make somebody holy. So, so what else? Any other questions, comments on this thread? Any thoughts come to mind as we're talking about this?
No, I think it's being a profession and holy.
Mhm.
I could not see myself going praying all day. It's just not what I want to do.
Yeah, but I would say you're a doctor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you're a doctor. I mean, certain professions, healers, right? I mean, there's a holiness in that profession,
Yeah.
right? Because it's to preserve the body, the mind. So that's. I mean, I'm not being tongue in cheek here. That's a form. If your heart's right, that's a form of
You're a
prayer.
businessman, you're creating jobs and producing construction guy.
I look at it that way. I've been in my own business for years now. I look at it a lot, how it provides for my family. A lot of times, in my world, there are deals where you're protecting incumbent business versus going after new business. So I look at it either as potentially creating jobs or protecting people's jobs. So I try to bring that orientation to it to keep a sense of a higher purpose than just the buck, right? Or what that dollar can do. So yeah, and then I think you can bring that. I mean, I'll say this because I know one of the things that, like, one of my ascetic things that's happened to me in my business, because I don't do any advertising or nothing, and nobody knows I exist except by word of mouth. I never know when the next dime is coming from, literally, but it always comes. So I've gotten used to just being really simplistic about it. Just do good work, do what I say. Meet my commitments, and let it just all unfold. Now that's for me. I'm not saying it's a marketing strategy, believe me. But for me in my own personal journey, that's how I've worked out my own salvation with fear and trembling in my business world, is learning. That's helped my faith, because I'm like, don't get me wrong. Sometimes I get nervous, But I'm like, okay, well, it'll all work out, and it does.
You chose the balance.
Yeah, but that's my own. I'm sure each one of you could tell the story
Yeah.
in your lives of how you've taken the multiple vocations that you fulfill, friend, husband, father, brother, sister, whatever. And, there's vocations, plural, and then there's vocation. We all have the same vocation, to love God and love others. That's, but there's different vocations we have in our life. And it's what we, and most of the time it, revolves around family and friendships is our next highest vocation, right? That's the part of love others.
I could see a topic on following this a little further. But, how do you, because to your comment about prayer before, it's not just I'm in church, I'm sitting up praying. The whole idea of the ceaseless prayer, how do you do that in your job? I mean, you just brought up the thing about being a doctor. You listen to people's concerns, you console them, you try and heal them. And
we got
everybody's
1,
job.
2, 3. We got 4 healers in the room that I'm aware of.
Beats having 4 lawyers in the room.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm just. I remember reading a couple of books on, how do you take your faith into your job, and I always had a book I really liked. It was more Protestant evangelical oriented, but it's still a good book because God is my CEO, and the whole.
I remember that book. Yeah.
How do you take your Christian values into your workplace? And trying to do that in a way that you're in the States, and we've got a lot of you can only say so much, but a lot of it dealt with what are your values? Do you do things above board and honest? Do you have people that report to you? Do you help them grow? In their career and make them feel a valued member. I mean, all those are things that, well, it's not prayer in the strictest, narrowest sense. I think all that is it's part of the love that you show in your work. It's part of your I wouldn't say your calling, but I think it's if you approach it from that. I mean, there are people that I've worked for or that work for me that are just I'm here. It's a number is that I got my career and that's just it. Or do you approach it from that we're all people that and part of your job with your fellow people and the people that you report to or that report to you, do you deal with them in a human way and trying to develop them and make them feel worthwhile and grow and try in whatever your way to make things happen in an ethical loving way.
Yeah, I think from our Orthodox framework, it's all about the integration, not the compartmentalization. So we come to church today, we receive the Eucharist, we leave these church walls, we go back to our whatever our day is today, tomorrow, and it all becomes part of one thing where any profession we do, we're serving other people. So if we're really embracing the sacramental life, just like whether you feel like it or not, eating your vegetables causes health, right? And fruits. So this, embracing the sacramental life causes spiritual health, and hopefully one of the outgrowths of that is, just like breathing, you're not conscious of it. You start just, you're more and more of that person that in whatever walk of life you're in that day, you're conscious about serving the person to the best of your ability. And then it just becomes, right? It just becomes what we're supposed to do. And I think, whatever profession we're in, that's why a lot of times that we talk in here, it's not so much ranking professions that like one's more important than the other necessarily. It's all important in the context of your life and your chosen path and what you're doing, right? So, obviously, Maria and Andrea and Michael and Elizabeth, are in, medical and healing professions. So, we naturally attach importance to that because there is great importance. But we all do things where we touch people on a daily basis, and that it's all derivative of our union with God and how we're living that. And that tripped me up for a long time when I was younger because I was looking for the perfect career. And I didn't really understand bloom where you're planted. And I didn't understand that, God doesn't judge us in comparison to others. He judges us for what he's given us. whether it's 10 talents, 5 talents, 1 talent, it's how. And so just to stay focused, okay, on my life, God, how am I working on my salvation with fear and trembling in the life that as Father Thomas Hopko would say, oh, you think you've chosen it, right? That I've chosen. So, he's the one who said, of course we have free will. We have no choice. Yeah, because and if you ever met him or listened to him, he had a mischievous glint in his eye, which was great because he got points, he got profound points across very simply and humorously, but so profound, orthodoxy and paradoxy. So, so really, I mean, just to wrap this up, whether monastic, married, single, whatever it may be, it's all the ascetics we bring, the vocations, it's all of equal importance depending on the path that we're in. So I'm going to wrap it up there unless anybody has any final thoughts, concerns, questions. Okay, I have no idea where we're going to go next week. I don't know if we'll continue on this thread. I keep saying that, but we'll see. Huh?
It's good.
Mhm.
All right. Well, for those online, thanks for joining today. I know I saw spikes in audience and questions. Susan, we'll pray for you. Susan's not feeling so great. And then what's next week? The 21st? There's nothing going on, right? We're here at church. Okay. So yeah, we should be back next Sunday, God willing. So everybody have a blessed week, and we'll look forward to being with you next Sunday.